Hello and welcome to the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation CISM Live series, where we connect with critical incident stress management subject matter experts live on YouTube. My name is Kelly and I'm the development coordinator and the host of the CISM Live series. If you enjoy the content being shared today, please consider giving this video a like and subscribe to ICISF's YouTube channel in order to be notified the next time we go live. My guest speaker today is Dr. Mary Schoenfeldt, who's an ICISF faculty member and an emergency management professional with a specialty in school and community crisis. She has been a part of ICISF from the very beginning and has seen the power of CISM over the years. She has served on the board of a statewide CISM network, been a team member of a local CISM team, and has helped people around the country understand the role of CISM. She has worked with groups all over the world and has responded personally to all types of incidents, from natural disasters such as hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, and floods, to airline incidents, school and community violence, and mass fatality incidents. Welcome, Dr. Schoenfeldt.
Thank you, Kelly. And just having you read that introduction makes me tired and makes me excited to have been in the field for as long as I have. But that's a lot, and it shows that I've been around a long time. And that's definitely the truth. So thank you, Kelly, and ICISF for adding this forum, the CISM Live, to the repertoire of the way that we can connect, communicate, and support each other. It's just been one more way that I've seen the world, and especially ICISF, adapt to this last year and the pandemic and the challenges that it's brought to us. It also reminds me of just how important critical incident stress management has been and still is for everyone, and not only over this past year, but going forward. Now, I've certainly had a lot of conversations with various individuals and organizations about how do we take that solid, proven concepts and model of CISM and make them work in some kind of a foreign environment that we never dreamed of. In this case, the virtual. The adaptations, or should I say adjustments, are creative and innovative, and yet the critical part of CISM Live and all of the other adaptations that we've made is that they are sticking to the foundation, the tried and true of CISM. And that's the piece we don't want to lose as we get creative. I'm going to talk about what that looks like in an emergency operations center and how we adapt and how we use those critical concepts in the way that keeps what works, what's proven, and yet allows us to be that creative and that innovative place. And so let me start by saying that I first encountered CISM in that long introduction that you gave me, and before it was even called CISM. It was CISD when I first was involved. And at that point, I was a law enforcement professional. And I saw that was what was the most value to support those of us that were on the front line in some form or another. And my career has evolved along with this model. And over the years, since my law enforcement days, I've become very familiar and very versed in school and community crisis. So, I'll finish up kind of this intro and we'll get to the actual questions here in just a second. But by professional title, I'm now an emergency management professional. And in that role, for the last many years, I've had the opportunity to be on all sides of that long list that you read in the intro of natural disasters and acts of violence, industrial accidents, and all kinds of other events that we would consider to be critical incident. And as an emergency management professional, I've been in that EOC environment, emergency operation environment, which is a windowless room where people are coming in to make life-changing decisions about others that they can't see, that they can't touch, that they're not in the field with.
Well, and that ties in. Thank you first and foremost for your beautiful introduction. That ties in nicely to our topic of discussion today. So we are actually doing a special World Congress session preview where we talk specifically about CISM, or critical incident stress management, and the role it plays not only in schools but activated emergency operation centers. And I appreciate you giving me kind of the background history of how your specific role ties into, or your history ties into that. So currently, have you even seen CISM used in schools and emergency operation centers? And if so, what does that look like?
I have, not only in schools, but as I say, in a number of other facilities and another set of places as well. And I think the best way to answer that question is just to give you an example. And I'll start not with a school example, but with a natural disaster example that happened to be here in my own state, about 30 miles from home. And I, like many responders, at least in my current profession, I'm used to getting on an airplane and going someplace and helping. I'm not used to it being in my own community. This was a mudslide that happened on a Saturday morning, and in literally less than 2 minutes, less than 120 seconds, it became a mass fatality, killed more than 40 people, and pulverized a neighborhood where there was very little that was left other than splinters of what used to be housing material. So that's what I'm going to use as to answer the first question here that we're dealing with. And that is that I was working for the largest city emergency management office in this county. I was duty officer that day, so I got activated very, very quickly to go to the County Emergency Operations Center, which is a windowless room, by the way. And oftentimes they're designed that way specifically to cut down on distractions, but they bring their own sense of unreality and artificiality and their own sense of stress, just simply by their very design at times. Well, this was a catastrophic event that we knew from the very beginning was going to be a prolonged event. And there was a group of trained volunteers who were used to taking calls in a call center of what roads might be closed in a slow-moving flooding incident. Well, these volunteers were thrust into what many will still tell me was the most significant and most horrific event that they've ever been a part of. And that was taking phone calls from people who thought that they had family that were deceased and that were in that slide. So looking at CISM and how CISM was used in that call center, first of all, we just did an incredible amount of psychological first aid. One of the cornerstones of what we do in response, disaster response, and that's the frame I'll use, is that psychological first aid. So we did a lot of delivering water, checking in with those folks in the call center, doing just even thumbs up, how are you doing? And we wound up changing their schedules because they were sitting in a very small room, 4 people to a room that really should have only probably held 2 people, but they jammed in extra phones. That's what we do in a disaster, right? We step up. So these folks, there's 4 in a room. They're taking call after call after call, and they cannot even understand people on the other end of the line because of the emotional reaction that was happening with those other folks that were looking for people that they cared about. So we did lots of water, delivered water, lots of connection, changed their schedules. And when I say we, I mean those of us who were asked to come in and to do stress management. This was not the coordinator of the call center. That was not the role that we were in. This was a specialized group that was asked to come in and provide disaster stress management within that emergency operations center. So we changed their schedule. And we said, no, you cannot sit there for 30 minutes and take call after call. After every third call, you need to get up and move. And we actually changed where we even put the in basket so that people physically had to move in order to do what they were doing. So psychological first aid. And we did a lot of strategic planning. And if we look at CISM and what's one of another one of our cornerstones, it's to do that strategic planning formula of figuring out who needs what and what are we going to do for them. So that was a lot of what we did. We used CMB, the structure of a CMB, in order to brief and to get some information to these folks and let them know that if they were feeling stressed, that was pretty typical. We did some diffusing, actually in some small groups with them. And then over a course of time, because this was a prolonged incident, we wound up doing some critical incident stress debriefing for that group as well. So that's a sequence, if you will, over a prolonged period of time in an emergency operations center that is different than what we might do in the field.
So, I mean, can you talk about some of the physical reactions individuals might be going through in an activated emergency operations center, or, either based on this instance or other instances with other EOCs that you may have seen?
Okay, and that's a great question because we don't always think about the physiological response. And it's one that really dictates what a great deal of our emotional response is, that physiological response. There's some great information out there on brain science that tells us in either an immediate critical incident or a prolonged critical incident that there's 132 chemicals that dump into our body. Lots of medical and biological names for those, but the simplest way for me to describe them is just with those 132 chemicals that dump. And what happens with those chemicals, because those chemicals, they impact what we do. So our behavior is impacted, our emotional response is impacted, our physiological response, how deep we breathe, how our heart rate works, and how we digest things are also impacted that way. And then cognitively, because our bodies don't understand that whatever that critical incident is, it's not that the dinosaur's not still chasing us, right? Our bodies believe that dinosaur is still chasing us. And if so, there's a lot of our day-to-day function we don't need to have, but we do need to be able to think, where are we going? But only where we're going. We don't need to remember what happened yesterday. We need to literally be able to see what's just in front of us, not the rocks and the trees on either side. So those chemicals, those chemicals then integrate with us and impact all of those. So in an emergency operations center, where this is a critical piece of information, is that dump of chemicals. And let's just talk about we'll start by talking about the cognitive. Okay, there's some studies that say the longer you are on shift, the more convinced you are that you can work even longer. Now let's put that in context, Kelly, and I know that you've got some family members that are emergency managers, so you understand the context of a prolonged activation in emergency operations.
I mean, typically a deployment can last anywhere minimum 2 weeks, and they could do multiple deployments back to back.
Yes.
When you're talking about EOCs, so yes.
Yes, and the mudslide that I was referring to, we were activated every single day for more than 6 weeks. So even if we, and we look at that as our context, and emergency management oftentimes runs on a 10-12 hour shift schedule anyway. So say I'm that emergency manager that's going into that EOC, and I know that I'm going to do a 10-hour shift. And as I'm headed in that door, or I'm, getting into that activated EOC, I go, boy, it's going to be a long day. When it gets to be about hour 9, those chemicals, and again, some of that physiological response that's happened to us, and when it gets to be about hour 9, I go, oh, you know what? I can stay a little bit longer. Oh, they still need me. This job isn't done. I'm still waiting for XYZ. So the longer we're on shift, the more convinced we can stay even longer. That was one study that was done with emergency management. Here's the other side of that, though, and that is that the longer that we are in a leadership position where we are making life-changing decisions,
Mm-hmm.
the longer we are in that, the less we are able to critically think and have good judgment. So put those two together, we've got people working very, very long shifts, making life-changing decisions, but because of the physiological response to the stressor of a critical incident, the more those decisions may not be as crisp and as good as they might have been. So that's some of the science that comes into emergency management. And that's one of the pieces that I've been able to do a lot of teaching and training to emergency managers. And they go, oh yeah, wow, okay. That sounds just like me, but I didn't realize it.
I'm sure that rings true for a lot of emergency managers in all facets of roles, because, just like CISM and peer support teams, emergency management teams also have critical roles and functions, that are defined, within an emergency management sector as well.
Yes.
So, I mean, you talked about also how, so we discussed kind of those physical reactions, or those physiological, biological stressors that one can encounter within an EOC. But what are your thoughts on using specifically a CISD in an activated emergency operations center?
Well, you said it just earlier, Kelly, that oftentimes an emergency operations center and emergency management, their activation are prolonged. So it's not a single event. And as my history of being around as long as I have shows, I remember when CISD was for a specific event. And fabulous, the perfect intervention for a single event. Well, our world has evolved. We're looking at CISDs for different populations than we did in the beginning. And for emergency managers in an EOC, and when I say emergency managers, let me clarify that also. That is not just that person who has that on their business card. That is also volunteers that are coming in. That is also, the amateur radio operator. That is also somebody from the governor's staff that has been assigned to be the liaison in a major disaster, to be that liaison between the city, the county, whatever the jurisdictional piece is, and the governor's office.
So you're not just talking about the individuals that are in the EOC itself, but you're also talking about the boots on the ground, the people that are responding, pretty much anyone and everyone that's involved within this specific, quote unquote, critical incident.
I am and I'm not. So let me clarify. Thank you for asking that question, because when I'm talking about an activated emergency operations center, that whatever that entity is, whether that's a school, whether that's a government office, whether that's a private business, whether that's a nonprofit, their typical emergency management personnel might be 1 or 2 people, or if it's a large county, or if it's a large government agency, there might be 3, 5, maybe even 10 that are day-to-day emergency managers. When you activate an emergency operations center, you can wind up with 100 people in your in as emergency management, doing emergency management functions, which is a coordination function within that emergency operations. So I'm talking, not at this point, I'm not talking about out in the field.
Mhm.
I'm talking about just within that structure itself.
Mhm.
And so it is broader than those that just have emergency management on their card. But it's not the field operations. Now, in that mudslide that I talked about, I was assigned as a partner within that emergency operations center. That was not my facility. I was the largest city in that county. So I was in their facility. And what I was assigned within the incident command system was to coordinate CISM services. And it was a delightful assignment. And so I was able to do that both for those responders that were in the field by bringing in some resources there, but then also being able to focus on those that were in that facility itself. So when I'm talking emergency management and within that EOC, I'm not talking the broader community system. I want to stay focused on what we were really doing with that group that was coming in. That in that case, I think we had 70 or 80 every day that was a part of that emergency operations center.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. So I mean, so now that we've defined kind of, what you're regarding when you talk about activated emergency operations centers, what are some additional tips that you can provide individuals or even CISM teams that may work within an activated EOC or even school setting, to try and help them and their coworkers kind of navigate that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because CISM, ICISF, CISM, we talk about a peer model. And to come into an activated emergency management system, then if we're going to stick with the peer model, there needs to be somebody within that CISM team that, first of all, has credibility within that system that we're going into, that emergency management system. We also need to make sure that if we're coming in as an outsider, which we are, if we're coming in to do that, we need to be a trusted entity. And part of being a trusted entity means that if we're coming in, we need to understand their procedures. We need to speak their language. And Kelly, as you and I were talking about before we went live, sometimes that feels like we need to be multilingual. And there are people like me that are. I can speak CISM, I can speak mental health, I can speak disaster psychology, and I can speak emergency management. So I can talk incident command system, I can talk NIMS, I can talk FEMA reimbursement, I can talk all of those other pieces that are part of that procedural language that emergency management needs to have. Fortunately, there are more and more people who can do that multilingual. But if you are a CISM team that's interested in working with your local emergency management, one of the first tips that I would give you would be to contact that emergency management office if you haven't already. Offer to be a part of their exercises. Offer to be an observer. Offer just simply to provide some kind of connection so that you can start to build relationships. Emergency services is about relationships. And when there's an activated EOC, that emergency management coordinator doesn't have time to meet someone new and invite you in to do what they're not sure they need okay, and that they're not sure that you're not going to try to take their activated personnel off shift. So you need to build that credibility with them ahead of time. And one of the big ones is certainly relationships, but also understanding their language.
But I have to say that's one of the similarities between CISM peer support teams and EOCs is that connection and how important those connections are, so that when a critical incident occurs, they're ready.
Right.
And they've built that rapport with one another. So they know one another, and it's not just some stranger coming in.
Well, and the other part of that is emergency management has, they have their key contact list. They have their vendor lists. They have their list of people that will get activated within a certain protocol. And you've got to build that relationship ahead of time so that you're even on that list. Like I say, as if they don't know you, and I'll give you very specific, very personal, very candid. When I was activated in that mudslide that I referenced earlier, on a good day, on a regular day in my emergency management job, I might have gotten 100 emails. Once I was activated and the world just sort of exploded, I was probably getting 300 or 400 emails a day. Now, on a regular day, I was sitting in my office and I might notice those on my computer. When I'm activated, they're on my phone. I don't even have my own computer. My intention is to answer every single one of those emails. The reality was, if I didn't recognize your name, I did not open your email. Now, my intention was I would get to you, but it could be 2 weeks down the road. So if you are a CISM team that has a magic wand that's going to make all of the stress disappear from my emergency operations center, if I don't know you, you can't get your resource to me. So it's that relationship ahead of time when we're talking about a CISM team that wants to be a part. Sometimes you can use if you're already a CISM team that's working with fire, or you're working with the hospital, or you're working with law enforcement, then sometimes you can come in and come around that door. But I'll also tell you that right now, emergency managers are absolutely exhausted. Absolutely exhausted. They have been activated for the last, more than a year. Many of them have not closed their EOCs since the pandemic hit. So they are exhausted, and that window of opportunity for CISM teams is open right now. If you can get through their exhausted state to say, hey, let me bring you some resources. Hey, let me bring you a little bit of information. Let me bring you some posters that you can hang in your emergency operations center. Let me, whatever that might be. Now's a good time, if you can get through their exhaustion, to actually start to think about how to build that relationship so that the next time they recognize your name when it pops up on their email when they're activated.
That's awesome information. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of CISM and peer support teams and even individuals can relate to that and be able to reach out to those locally. Now, is there a list or something like for EOCs within their state if they're looking to try and help these individuals?
Oh, there is. You can go to your whatever your local state emergency management division is, and it will list your counties and your cities, and oftentimes will give an emergency management contact. Okay. But emergency managers and EOCs are not only within government. They certainly are there, but there are also private enterprise, and your schools, your local schools have an emergency management system of some sort. And so you can come in and access, if you aren't already, you can come in and access your local schools to be a resource for them. By the way, that reminds me, Kelly, just to tell everybody here
Uh-huh.
that if you do have some of your CISM team that's trained in the schools model, ICISF schools model, we adapted and updated that model in about 2017. So there's a lot more information about the incident command system, for instance, and how schools fit within that larger incident command system, whether that's within their city, whether that's within their county, that's within that's in their state. There's some other adaptations and additions that we put into the new model. And ICISF is sponsoring 2 different times that we are going to bring together anybody who's been trained in the schools model prior to 2017. I think is the information's on the website, but I think it's prior to 2017, anyone who was trained in the schools model. And Barb Ertl and I, who wrote the material, Barb and I are going to do 2 different sessions, one in the morning and one in an evening, just to make it accessible to everyone at no charge. So you can come and you can get that update. So please, all of the CISM teams that are out there, please share that information with your team members and then look on the website and get that information. It would be nice to see you there.
Yeah, and we'll reference our website, which is icisf.org, at the bottom of this description today for this video. And just so I know, Dr. Berry, you're actually doing a presentation specifically on activated emergency operation centers within our upcoming World Congress 16, which is held biannually. We have it every 2 years. What can our viewers actually hope to learn by participating in this session?
What I plan to do in that session is give a lot of specific resources and a lot of more specific examples than what we were able to do just in this conversation about the specific types of things that you can do within an EOC that truly are based in the foundation of good practice. So, you know, a lot of very specific information and resources.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I, for one, am very excited to see your presentation coming up in May. Now, for any of our viewers that have joined us today, this year we are actually having our World Congress 16 from May 25th through the 27th of 2021. You guys can join the ICISF community from around the world at ICISF's Virtual World Congress. This real-time live event features 3 days of content, connections, and community that you do not want to miss. And in fact, early bird registration rates are still available through April 25th. You can learn more about Dr. Mary Schoenfeldt's upcoming World Congress presentation, as well as view other presentations by visiting our website at ICI, S as in Sam, F as in Frank, worldcongress.org. The link is also going to be in the description of this video today, and we hope to see you all there. Today, I'd like to thank Dr. Schoenfeldt for joining us today for our CISM Live series, where we connect with critical incident stress management subject matter experts live on YouTube. Now, make sure to join us next week on Wednesday, April 21st at noon, where we speak with Dr. Victor Welsant. To learn more about updating your CISM wisdom, CISM refresher programs offered through the ICISF. It's going to be something that you don't want to miss. And again, if you've enjoyed this video and this content today, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to ICISF's YouTube channel so you don't miss out on the next time we go live. And we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Kelly.